Now, Gabriel, as well as being a phenomenal person, when it comes to storytelling, you are an absolute raconteur of the highest order.
You mentioned, Ronnie, that I'm a raconteur. I mean, I guess I am technically a storyteller, or at least I'm a journalist. I write stories for a living. I would say that I am a journalist for whom the act of telling the story is but a luxurious afterthought, and the process of acquiring the information, that is really what I do. So I'm not sure if I'm as much of a raconteur as you say, but I will tell you a story about storytelling. When I was working at the Washington Post, I was doing this thing called the Stern Fellowship. You're not the first person to ask if you have to be a Stern Fellow to become a Stern Fellow. But as you know, I'm very light of heart, but there probably have been a few Stern Fellows who've been Stern Fellows. It was glorious in that people actually probably found it quite funny. They were just like, you don't know anybody here, we're just going to send you into Congress and tell you to ask Bernie Sanders a question. And they were amused by some of my idiosyncrasies as they perceived them. There's one story in which I used the word whilst. They thought that was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. They said, are we in Geoffrey Chaucer? Is this Shakespearean English? What is whilst? But anyway, they were all very lovely to me, and I seem to be charming enough or curious enough to them for me to get involved in very interesting stuff. And one of the things I got very interested in and very involved in was the confirmation of the Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh. This was probably going to be a fairly procedural process culminating in his appointment. Nominated by Trump, he was going to be put before a Republican-held Senate. That was going to be that. And then there's a woman who came forward and accused him of having sexually assaulted her when they were teenagers. There's one witness to this, but he was this character called Mark Judge. Great name for a judicial controversy. So you have a Stern Fellow and a Mark Judge. And Mark Judge, his claim to fame was that he'd been a childhood friend of Brett Kavanaugh. And this woman who accused him of wrongdoing, Christine Blasey Ford, she named him as a witness or a potential witness. And somebody contacted the Washington Post, where I think Judge had basically been drowning his sorrows at a bar. And he had said to a barman or to somebody at the bar something like, I got to get out of town, I got to lie low. Because he knew at that point that he was going to be the number one most wanted man in the US. Because he was the person in whose gift this appointment lived or died. Thankfully, this person who overheard Mark Judge say he was going to go lie low for a while contacted the Washington Post. Amazing journalists at the Washington Post, their investigations team, all of them assembled a list of potential places where Mark Judge might be staying. And they said, you, Gabriel, in that you're this weird Englishman with a lot of time on his hands, are going to be the man who goes on the road and literally knocks at the door of every single one of these places until you find him. So I got on the road and I spent days and days and days driving around, and it was pissing down with rain. I think I knocked on someone's door and they were like, I don't know who you are, but you're a wet, bald man and I don't want a lot to do with you. I got to my final address and I walked up to this house about 50 meters from the sea. It was a very overcast, rainy day, and I remember walking up, knocking on the door again. Answer there came none. And I think I must have just been sniffing around the property. I looked into a car in the driveway. I remember looking at the car and thinking, wait a second. In the back of the car were a load of clothes, and never got to write this, some vintage Playboy pornography. And then I saw an Amazon box with the name Mark Judge on it. And I thought, oh my gosh, he is here. And that is, you know, as close as one can come to a full body orgasm in journalistic terms. You're this little nobody traveling around the country and you found this guy that America is looking for. Or so I thought. I thought he must be in there now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sit in my car, my rental vehicle, literally parked in the middle of the road. As I was doing that, I think the local sheriff or like the local police department must have heard of this character in a car just staring at a home in probably menacing manner. Came up to me, I saw like the blue lights of the police vehicle. They're like, what's this guy doing? And I remember them asking me questions, and just as they started to ask me questions and I saw the door open and out comes this man. He was wearing like a red baseball cap and shorts and flip-flops. And I basically had to somehow like park the police issue. I think I was like, I'm a journalist, please leave me alone. I'm that guy, I need to speak to that guy. I'm not sure this is, the peroration of the story probably isn't as exciting as the build-up. I basically managed to get a picture of him and talk to him for a bit. And nothing he said was, regrettably for me, on the record. So I think the Washington Post front page headline the following day was something like, the Washington Post finds Mark Judge. Anyway, I was thinking about the extent to which, as I mentioned, writing has nothing to do with my form of storytelling. So there is a form of storytelling that involved a whole lot of things, but not writing. And I called the Washington Post newsroom. They were all in like a room together, and I was like, I found him. And they were just in peals of laughter. I don't think they could believe it. I think they thought they were sending some stupid kid who had nothing better to do, and there's no way we'll actually find him, but we might as well try. Anyway, I remember feeling very pleased with myself, and I think that there are probably one or two people at the Post who, all these years later, will remember, I hope, that I discharged my duties honourably in relation to manhunt for Mark Judge, which, I mean, it's not even a footnote in history. This is a footnote of a footnote of a footnote.
I have this endearing image in my mind of when you visited me in Sweden, and we were there at this big park festival, all these students, and I remember just being in awe of the way you made friends with people within seconds, but not just made friends with them, you were sat there and listening to their stories within seconds. You have this way of drawing out stories. I mean, it's a phenomenal journalistic capability, but also testament to the person that you are. And the little wicked fairy inside my head is wondering, has that ever gone south?
Definitely. I mean, I think B, my wonderful wife, will occasionally upbraid me for being too overtly questioning. And it is true that you can't just expect people to respond positively to being asked direct questions. I think another thing I often say to aspiring members of my profession, you have to have an almost masochistic tolerance for rejection, and you have to be able to knock on someone's door or speak to somebody at a Trump rally or call an MP and just understand that they might tell you to F off. I spent a lot of time trying to get Trump voters to talk to me, and they were like, number one, I don't understand your accent or where you're from. I had one Republican senator who could not disabuse himself of the idea that I was French. And then number two, I don't trust the publication you work for. So you have to be able to tolerate rejection when asking questions, and it can go wrong, but you have to be able to pick yourself back up.
Paint to me a memory that I have of you sat in the back of a Eritrean taxi.
That is a very astute recollection of yours. But I went to said country a few years ago because I had developed an interest in Eritrean history, and I managed to get into the country, which is occasionally nicknamed Africa's North Korea. It is not a particularly open or democratic country. I can't remember which bit stuck in your mind, but what sticks in my mind was I got there with my friend Lawrence, and we were going from the capital, Asmara, to Massawa, which had been basically reduced to rubble by a war with Ethiopia, and it was one of the hottest places in the world. I think it was around 50 degrees centigrade when we were there. It used to be an Italian colony, and we got this incredible spaghetti road through the mountain down to the Red Sea in this taxi, which, I mean, it was terrifying. And there'd be bits of tarmac falling off the road and monkeys crossing it. But anyway, I remember one of the most stunning and picturesque descent of my life, thankfully controlled descent, and getting down to Massawa. I think we got accompanied by a police officer when we got down, who ended up just randomly walking around and sleeping with us.
Oh.
There was this surreal moment where it was me and my friend and a snoring police officer and a cab driver all in one tiny room trying to take refuge from the blistering heat. And we were just listening to, I think, probably Eritrean army radio.
Gabriel, thank you for coming on The World is Storytelling.
My pleasure. I'm so pleased to have been on. Thrilled to partake in this.
And that was The World is Storytelling with me, Ronnie. To support The World is Storytelling, make sure to subscribe, rate, follow the podcast, buy the book, and get in touch. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.